Hello Reddit readers, today we have very interesting stories on the timeline. I will not detain you anymore. Like and subscribe to the channel of pleasant viewing. Story 1 from user Perfectionism. He showed up and set appointments with me every day for a week, then 2 a week, then 1 a week, until we reached 1 a month, which he maintained until he retired. I had an undiagnosed disease that was devastating my life. But doctors looking for horses, not zebras, kept dismissing me as having nothing wrong with me, and telling me it was all psychological. And eventually, I did become psychologically broken. After a few years of not being able to get the medical help I needed, I was suicidal. I had a suicide plan, and trying to get my affairs in order was a protective factor, keeping me from killing myself. But eventually, I ended up becoming impulsively suicidal, and I made an impulsive suicide attempt. So impulsive that I made the attempt unconsciously, without any thought to commit suicide. In the moment I desperately needed help. I went to a mental health clinic. They said I was beyond their resources and wanted to have me committed. I had 2 cats and had not made sufficient arrangements to clear out my apartment. The idea of losing my cats and the remnants of my career and my apartment by being committed did not seem like it would make me less suicidal. I called a hotline. The guy on the hotline was on the phone with me off and on for what was probably most of his shift. For instance, had me call a friend and to pick up my firearms and the items I had acquired to carry out my suicide plan, then call the hotline back, or he would call me. He also arranged for me to meet a therapist the next morning. He found one willing to meet me in the parking lot of his office at 7 a.m. That therapist saved my life and kept me alive. During years of therapy, during the years I was working with my therapist, an immunologist finally diagnosed my disease and started treatment. She also saved my life. It was not one thing. My therapist said it was his compassion and commitment to helping me. Over the years, he taught me several tools to manage my mental health and prevent myself from becoming suicidal again. Even though for years, my brain was still wired to see suicide as a possible solution to nearly every problem. I had a few users ask me to share some of the tools I learned to manage my mental health. I answered the question below. Story 2 from user Am I Boy. You have to be your own first priority if you want to show up as your best self for the people you love. I didn't really understand it at the time. How could I make myself my first priority when I knew I would be damning my siblings to a childhood of religious and emotional abuse? If I chose to prioritize myself, but eventually I took the advice and moved out. I learned what happiness means. I learned how safety feels. I learned that I actually am worthy of love, including love from myself. Then I came back to be there for my siblings again, and they don't hold it against me. Our relationship is still good, and neither of them feel like I abandoned them. Although a few months after I moved out, my mom did ask me how she could mend our relationship, and I said that I'm not sure it's possible at all. But at the very least, you have to see a psychiatrist and get your explosive anger under control. You have got to be a better mother to my siblings than you were to me. Maybe then, I will even think about working on our relationship. She did go see a psychiatrist. I haven't been able to forgive her. Nor have we been able to repair our relationship. We tried family therapy for a couple of months, but she kept talking over me, and I felt unsafe at therapy. So I said I wasn't going to do it anymore. However, even though my relationship with her didn't get better, my siblings got the chance to spend the latter half of their childhood in a healthy, loving, happy home. They have okay relationships with both parents and with me. I prioritized myself for the first time in my entire life, and suddenly my life got better, and so did the lives of the people I care about. I genuinely believed making life better for myself would mean condemning my siblings to a life of abuse where they have no adults in their lives that they can trust. It was the opposite. They gained 2 extra trusted adults because once my mom's explosive temper cooled off, my dad also started spending more time at home and stopped being a workaholic. They have less money now than they did when I was younger, but they have more love and happiness. They all feel safer. And all of this only happened because I took my therapist's advice and prioritized myself. Story 3 from user NoSpeed6055. School was pretty rough for me. When I was about 13, I had multiple uncontrollable public anxiety-related breakdowns. I was self-harming and was contemplating suicide a lot. I got through it all out of sheer spite and anger, having to depend on myself and never being allowed to seek professional help. My parents told me that I was strong enough that people have real problems. Yours aren't a big deal. You have no reason to be depressed anyways. And also the classic, what would people think if they found out you're in therapy? They'd call you crazy. Years later, I started begging my mom to let me see a therapist, which eventually she did. I think it's because she viewed me as old enough to have actual problems or something. Anyways, at the time, I blamed myself for almost everything that happened to me as a kid. I told my therapist, "Oh, I got bullied because I was a weirdo. I was too negative. I should have made a bigger effort to socialize stuff like that." I was going into detail regarding my biggest breakdown. Again, blaming myself when he just stopped me and asked, "And where were the adults in this situation?" And it all just clicked. There were so many signs, ever since I was little. Obvious signs that I was different. I was a gifted kid. I had very specific special interests. I was always awkward and weird. I got picked on, I got left out. I never made many friends, and the adults did nothing. They let me spiral out of control. They never gave me any actual advice. They never took me seriously. But they definitely pointed out that I was too sensitive, selfish, negative, non-inviting, awkward and overthinker, a spoiled brat. The truth is, all this time, I was simply autistic Lomeo. Story 4 from user Spiritual Bear 4495. Not from a therapist, but I feel it belongs here. I read a book once that introduced me to the concept of the near enemy. It's a Buddhist concept taught in psychiatry. It opened my eyes to some things that had always bugged me. The concept gave me a framework to understanding why people are the way they are. This is a good example of this, the near enemy. It's a psychological concept. Two emotions that look the same but are actually opposite. Pity and compassion are the easiest to understand. Compassion involves empathy. You see the stricken person as an equal. Pity doesn't if you pity someone you feel superior. It looks like compassion, acts like compassion, but is actually the opposite of it. As long as pity's in place, there's not room for compassion and love and attachment. It's friendships, marriages, mothers, and children. Any intimate relationship love wants the best for others to live wherever they want and do what makes them happy. That's love attachment takes hostages. Finally, equanimity and indifference. I think that's the worst of the near enemies. The most corrosive equanimity is balance. When something overwhelming happens in our lives, we feel it strongly, but we also have the ability to overcome it. An ability to accept things and move on. The near enemy is indifference. They just don't feel pain. They don't care about others. They don't feel like the rest of us. They're like the invisible man wrapped in the trappings of humanity, but beneath there's emptiness. I got the quote from here. Shtup saza learning, as a learning, Nireen mais. Edit. I am so damn sorry I didn't do this in the first place. So please forgive me. The quote is taken from a novel by the incomparable Louise Penny, a terrific Canadian novelist. Her series about Inspector Gamache is all about humanity, and the website quotes her book, The Cruelest Month. I've read all her books, and I highly recommend them. Story 5 from user 9 of Swords. I was 14, and I spent every session in tears after one session, right after my grandpa died, and his son took his grief out on me. My therapist sat back in his chair, removed his glasses, let out a breath, and said in that wonderful Aussie accent, "Good Lord, you are surrounded by assholes." It was the first time an adult had looked at my surroundings and realized why I was the way I was. Everyone else believed the problems all began and ended with me. I was the problem. He looked at the family dynamic and saw that much of my behavior was my self-preservation technique to survive my family. Years later, I heard the quote, "Before you self-diagnose with depression or low self-esteem, first ascertain that the people around you aren't actually assholes." Paraphrased, I don't recall the exact, and I remembered Dr. Kitchen, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds for years. I told myself I was as that's how I was treated. But the reality is, everyone is in their own way and projected it onto me. I see this more and more as I get older. I see Mom understanding my neurodivergency as she watches her grandkids struggle and recognize it in herself. I see Grandma understanding when I explain my diagnoses, how that affected my adolescence, and how my medication helps. I uncovered my uncle's secret life and how high-strung and in need of therapy he was. I see my dad's flaws emerge in my middle sister. I am angry on behalf of my teen self at how I was treated and talked about when it was by brains, janky wiring that was misunderstood. However, I still want to know why my house drawing meant I had sexual issues. Never got clarification on that. I had to do drawings of various things, and my house was apparently off. I did turn out ace, but that's not a dysfunction. Dr. Kitchen still practices, but in forensic psychology. I wonder if I could send him a message. Story 6 from User Journey to Better Life. I grew up as a gifted child, which I am obviously aware of the privilege that comes with, and I'm thankful for it. It also comes with huge burnouts, stress, and insane pressure to meet the expectations. I never even had a say in setting. I was in a session with my therapist, and he said, "You know, you aren't supposed to know what you are doing. You aren't supposed to know what you want. You shouldn't know anything about what your life should look like. That's the entire point of being alive. You go through different stages until you find your purpose. It's not some big philosophical journey where you race to find the meaning of life. Your purpose could be as simple as smiling at a stranger. That person decides to stay another day, and 50 years later, his or grandson, granddaughter finds the cure for cancer. You can't think too deeply into life, because that's not what we are supposed to do with our time. It will just drive you insane, because we aren't meant to know what our reason for being alive is. With that being said, just do what makes you happy. Take classes you enjoy, not what will make you rich. Talk to people that make you happy. Work jobs that you find rewarding. At the end of the day, a person who loves their life is so much richer than a billionaire. If you enjoy something, follow it. If you love someone, keep them in your life. If someone makes you happier, allow change to take place. You are your own person. You don't need to be what your parents think you can be. You don't need to be who your peers think you should be. You don't need to be who your teachers or mentors think you should be. Are you capable of all those things? Of course you are. But is that what you actually want? You have been told your entire life you're special, smart, beautiful. That's all true. But at the end of the day, just because you are all of those things doesn't mean you have to live a particular type of life. The only person that's expectations you need to meet are your own. If the people in your life truly love you, they will support whatever makes you happy. You have the potential to be great is the most backhanded compliment you could ever receive. You are already great now. It's time for you to decide what being great means to you. It's all up to you. You don't owe anyone anything. It's your life. Do what makes you feel like you lived out your purpose, and not everyone's purpose is a career and family. Live a life you can lay on your deathbed and say to yourself, "I did good." That's all that really matters. I remember it word for word, changed absolutely everything. Story 7 from user Ahklem. It wasn't one thing he knew a lot of precise terminology to describe emotional states and experiences that I hadn't been able to think clearly about because I didn't have words for them. Overmatched is a good one. A word I'd never heard anyone use that described an extremely difficult emotional situation in a way that articulated why it was so difficult for me. He taught me the tools I needed to become a good narrator of my own experience. It's very hard to make it through life. If you can even tell yourself what you're feeling and why. I guess if there is any one thing he said, it wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. I described something my mother had said to me when I was a little kid. A look of pain crossed his face and he said, "That's terrible." Nobody I'd ever talked to reacted that way. And it had particular force because he was a knowledgeable, deeply experienced expert in family systems. If he said it was terrible, it was terrible. The other thing he said that has stuck in my mind was pretty funny. I'd been seeing him for 4 or 5 years without ever mentioning the teeny little problem I had with alcohol. I went on an emotionally brutal extended road trip, during which I had my moment of clarity and realized that if I didn't stop drinking, I was going to die, and I didn't want to die. So I stopped drinking. which meant that before very long, I was in extremely bad shape. Physically and emotionally. I felt bad enough that I had to talk to him. So I gave him a call. I told him the whole thing in particular. The fact that I'd concealed the fact that I was an alcoholic from him for years. Because I felt that if I started talking about that particular problem, I'd have to solve it. And I didn't want to solve it. Until I did late in the conversation. I asked him what he thought. He paused and said, "I'm surprised that I'm surprised. God damn, I miss him. But he can legally practice across state lines." Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and write comments. See you later.